o'clock. Yeah, I've still got nothing through on my computer, but you know what? We'll just ignore that and hope that we can see the questions come through and stuff. Okay, Camilla's now saying 1 sec. Now we're live. Okay. Right. Okay. Excellent. Now we're live. Well, if we do have people watching, it's really hard to tell. Basically, welcome to Second Nature's first ever YouTube live. We are still got nothing through on my computer, but you know what? Okay,
we literally just said that there wouldn't be
a bit of delay
onto my computer. Issue.
Yes, exactly. Okay, good. We are now live. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining and welcome. My name is Robbie Puddick. I'm a registered nutritionist and one of the health coaches here at Second Nature. I also work in the marketing team. And this is our first ever YouTube live, as you can probably tell by the giggling at the start and the fact you could hear me in the background. I've got my face on my computer in the background now at the moment, which is all a bit weird. But thank you all for joining us. And Gemma, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hello. Well, look, you can't start the day without a little bit of humour. So, feel like it starts off on a good note, as we'll be discussing quite a heavy topic today. Exactly. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Jemma and I'm a registered nutritionist and a health coach here at Second Nature. I have worked for the company now for about 3 years, which has gone so quickly. I work primarily in the NHS team. So I work with those who have got type 2 diabetes or who are pre-diabetic. So it will be a very interesting conversation today because we can use a lot of member examples of things of what kind of has gone right, what's gone wrong, etc.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good point. I should also say that, similar to Gemma, I've always worked in the NHS side of things too. And Gemma, I remember your first day actually, and we went with the team to lunch. Was it Wagamama's or Bill's? I think it might have been Bill's.
We went to Bill's, yeah.
And you were saying then how keen you were to work on the NHS side of things. So that must have been about 4 years ago.
I think I pulled you aside many times to be like, Robbie, get me in the team. I need to be in the team.
Exactly. So we are talking all things type 2 diabetes today. We probably will touch on type 1 just to basically differentiate between the two at some stage, but really we're talking about type 2 diabetes today. And we've got some questions that have come through. We've got some common themes that we always get asked at Second Nature as well, just in day-to-day coaching, online, in our guides, that kind of thing. So we're going to be covering a lot. And also, if you are live, I've got the chat stream behind me on my computer. So please, if you do have questions, feel free to send them into the chat and me and Gemma will be happy to answer those lives. But we do have plenty to talk about. Anyway, so I think to kick us off, Gemma, you obviously talked about our health coaching backgrounds and how we've worked with people in the NHS with Second Nature. And I think it would be a great place to start for the people watching. We can obviously talk about the physiology of type 2 diabetes in a bit and maybe dig into that bit. But I think it would help as well, just from a human perspective, when we're looking, because obviously Second Nature is very holistic. We focus on behavioral science and psychology. So what are the common barriers you see with people coming through the NHS programs like Second Nature? So for the people that join us, they've got type 2 diabetes or they're living with pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes. What are the main barriers to them living a healthy lifestyle and the main reasons that they struggle maybe with managing their blood sugar levels and all that kind of thing?
That is a very good starting point. And I think it's important to firstly establish that no 2 days are the same at Second Nature. And that's one thing that I notice is that we coach so many people and I speak to so many different people every day. And there's so many different conversations and topics and questions that come up. But primarily the first sort of thing that people want to know, they want to understand what diabetes is, because, they might have been going 5, 10, 15 years doing certain things in a certain routine. They've gone to their doctors because they're experiencing some symptoms and they've come back and they've gone, you've got type 2 diabetes. Google's a minefield. You can go online and you can have a look and figure out your ways, but actually it's understanding what diabetes is. And that's the kind of key here, because knowledge is power in one sense, that, understanding what this is doing to your body and the impact that this is going to have in the short term and the long term can help people to understand what they can do to help with that, So I think understanding it is definitely one thing, but also then managing it If it's pre-diabetes, we want to try and manage it so it doesn't develop into type 2 diabetes. If they've got type 2 diabetes, what can they do to reverse it? So as you said, we work in a very holistic approach with the program, and as my job is kind of helping them to understand that actually there's no blanket answer. It's not me saying, right, if you eat 3 balanced meals every day for a month, that's going to help. It's a combination, of diet, exercise, sleep, stress levels, managing them, and general mindset. So I think it's really difficult to say specific questions because it's general for me, just confusion. People tend to just feel really confused with it.
That's interesting you said that, and I think you're right as well. There's this misconception of type 2 diabetes as a disease of blood sugar, but we're doing a webinar for Vitality as well. So for anyone watching, we're partnering with Vitality, the health insurer, in a couple of weeks to deliver a webinar on this topic, which will be free to air for everyone. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. But really, the high blood sugar is right at the end of the disease process. It's only after your body, I guess, has spent years becoming dysfunctional in managing incoming food that your blood sugar levels start to rise. So I think you're absolutely right. And then that also reflects in how we often treat it, where people are just given drugs to lower blood glucose, lower their blood sugar, but they're not actually treating a symptom, they're not treating the underlying cause. So I think you're right.
Exactly it.
And that's definitely something we try and unpack on Second Nature. There's obviously the education things that start. So I suppose before we get into the questions, and the fact you said the biggest barrier seems to be a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, and a lack of ability to then act on anything because they, maybe there's that knowledge gap. They don't know what they're don't know what they're treating. It would probably make sense to kind of do a snapshot into type 2 diabetes pathology, or the root causes of the disease. And I suppose there's no way we can say this quickly. But I was
going to say, I was going through it. It's very, very scientific. That's the other thing that other people get confused about. And I know when I was doing my training, there's so much terminology, insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance. What do they mean? Because it can be very confusing for people.
Absolutely. So I think we'll do our best to summarize it in a few minutes, and then I think once we've done that, the questions we will get to later will make a bit more sense for everyone. So type 2 diabetes, now I define it as a disease of energy toxicity, right? So now what does that mean? It basically means that your body has got too much energy in it, i.e. whether that be fat or carbohydrate, and it's struggling to regulate it. And then what does that look like when we get deep inside? When we look at individuals living with type 2 diabetes, what is going on? Well, you mentioned insulin before. They always have, and this is consistent, there's always a high level of insulin resistance. So then we've got to step back again and say, well, what's insulin? Well, insulin is a hormone which is responsible for energy storage, basically. The role of insulin is to push glucose and fat out of the blood into our body's cells for energy, be that the muscles, the fat cells for storage, or the heart or the brain. Insulin is shunting energy out of the blood and into parts of the body to either be burnt or stored for energy. So when you develop insulin resistance, the parts of the body don't respond as well to insulin, and then the energy is kind of left in the bloodstream, so it can't get into the muscles or the heart or the brain, and this is a problem. And then what tends to happen? Well, the body doesn't want the energy in the blood, because high levels of energy in the bloodstream can be toxic and actually damage our body cells. And this is why our body has a really tight frame where it wants to keep glucose. So we've got these phrases, hypo and hyperglycemia, where got low and high blood sugar. It's because the body wants to keep it within that tight frame. So the body says, okay, well, I can't shunt the energy into the muscles or the fat cells, the fat beneath our skin. It's got to go somewhere. And it starts to build up in our internal organs, particularly the liver and the pancreas. It just so happens to be that the two places that are responsible for managing our blood sugar levels are the two organs that get clogged with fat. And then that's when we tend to see the development of type 2 diabetes, it's essentially a mismanagement of energy, where the body is having to store excess fat or glucose, which can be converted into fat, into the internal organs, the liver, the pancreas. Some people might refer to this as belly fat, or the technical term is visceral fat, builds up around in and inside your internal organs. And then those very organs that are managing your blood sugar levels, your liver, your pancreas, are unable to manage your blood sugar levels because they're clogged with fat. Now, I don't think we'll go much deeper because it just keeps going. Like you could,
it is a minefield.
It's
like,
a minefield.
Sit here and talk about it all day.
We could talk about all the ins and outs of it. But that is kind of the crux. It's like a mismanagement of energy levels. And then the important thing with that process is that blood sugar isn't the disease, it's the end of the disease process, which I think many people don't know. And that's important to understand. And then from that, hopefully, people think, from the conversations we'll have over the next half an hour or so, people will think, oh, that makes sense, hopefully, because the very things that help to treat type 2 diabetes are the things that help the body store energy and, you know, take it out of those internal organs and actually burn it for energy, store it in our adipose tissue, the fat cells, etc. Cool. Okay. Now, is there anything I've missed there, do you think? Is that kind of...
I think that's a really good general overview. There are a couple of things that you said that instantly I was like, oh, I've had a question like that today, like to do with this.
Brilliant.
So can I go for it? Can I say what
Let's go. Yeah, absolutely.
So something that I had that pops up quite a lot is it's a common misconception that you have to be overweight or obese to develop type 2 diabetes. We know that as health professionals, but when I'm coaching people, a lot of them have got healthy BMIs, you know, they're a healthy weight, and they get so confused because they say, well, how am I developing type 2 diabetes when I'm not overweight? And as going back to what you just said about visceral fat, is because that's where the fat goes in the first place before we can see those changes. You know, it's covering our internal organs before we then start to go, oh my God, I've put on weight, because you might be building this up over time for so long and the disease is developing inside you that you can't see what's happening.
Absolutely. So then that's a brilliant point and such a good question, because like you said, it is a common misconception. People think, oh, people with type 2 diabetes, they're just, you know, it's only people living with obesity. Completely not true. It is true that the more obese you are, the higher at risk you are from developing type 2 diabetes, but it's actually not the disease itself. So like you said, it's where the fat is stored. So I heard a great phrase earlier from Robert Lustig. I was listening to one of his podcasts, you know, the endocrinologist from the US. Yeah. He's quite intense. he's quite an intense character, but I really like him. And he says it's not the fat you can see, it's the fat you can't. And I thought that was a really good quick way of explaining it to people that might be healthy weight and have type 2 diabetes. That's what's happening. It's the fact that for some reason your body has lost its ability to store this excess energy underneath your skin in what we call subcutaneous fat. It's just the fat beneath the skin, basically. That's our protective blanket. And then it's having to store it in your liver, in the pancreas, and then that's how type 2 diabetes can develop. So that is how people at a healthy weight or any weight can develop type 2 diabetes. There's a lot more to it than that, obviously. But yeah, that is one of the common misconceptions, and actually ties in well to one of the questions we've got. Now, I'm not sure what their actual name was, but their tag on Instagram is WheezyWoo74, which I thought was quite funny. So WheezyWoo74 is basically asked, is diabetes hereditary? So, you know, talking about that question we've just discussed, it links in quite well, because it might be that you have a genetic predisposition to storing excess fat in your internal organs, and therefore you'd be at higher risk of type 2 diabetes. And we actually see this play out in South Asian populations, where there's been generations of malnourishment, basically. And when you're malnourished, your body is in this kind of energy conservation state where, because you're not eating enough food, your body is trying to store as much of it as possible. and you basically lose your ability to store excess levels of fat in underneath your skin, and it seems to preferentially get stored in and around your internal organs, which is interesting. And then when we've seen new generations of these South Asian populations coming through, they develop the same predisposition where they store more fat in and around their internal organs. And when I was in India, it was amazing to see there were signposts in the parks around Mumbai that said, if you're at the age of 30, you need to get checked for type 2 diabetes.
Wow,
now that is crazy when you think we used to call diabetes adult onset, and I know 30 is adult, but we used to basically say, you know, it's only people in their 50s, 60s, 70s with obesity that develop it. But we're seeing people in their teens and children developing it, young adults developing it now as well. So to the question, is it hereditary? It's not the only reason you get it, but yeah, it is involved as for sure. And there's another question we've had through from Roxana Hassan. So thanks for the question. So Roxana asks, Jemma, do you need to be in ketosis to keep blood sugar levels low? And I think what she's basically referring to nutritional ketosis, where if you eat a really high fat diet, your liver produces these ketones to provide fuel for the brain. And we could get more into that, but I think we'll probably just
I would generally, I was going to say, I would generally say no, because I feel like especially with the Second Nature program, it's a difficult one, because some people look at a low carb diet as keto, and keto is obviously restricting your carbs like significantly. Yeah. Is it less than 20 grams of carbs per day?
It's generally less than like less than 50 at least, and basically as low as possible is the general. Which is impossible.
Don't get me wrong. It can work for some people. It depends what your goals are and things like that. But and for the answer, for the sake of this, I would say you don't need to be, because we have different types of programs on the Second Nature program where we follow a lower carb approach. So that could be either having 3 carb servings per day, which is 15 grams per serving, and then having a carb-free meal, just to allow, time for your body to digest the carbs from your previous meal, etc. Or, for the National Diabetes Prevention Program, we look at 3 to 6 servings per day with a maximum of 2 servings per meal. So I think by having a lower carb approach, you're getting your body used to not having so much glucose pumped into your body straight after eating, but you're also having it alongside a balanced meal. So you're having a source of protein, you're having a source of fat, you've got your veggies with it, which means that you're much more likely to start sustaining healthier habits, as well as managing your blood glucose levels, which in turn, with consistency, can help to reduce their insulin resistance and improve insulin sensitivity.
Absolutely. I think the point you raised there is really important. It's like keto does work, basically. So we have clinical trial data, particularly as a company in the US called Verta Health, that use a nutritional ketosis to treat diabetes. And people who use nutritional ketosis and a keto diet can put their diabetes into remission. But the issue with these restrictive approaches, like very restrictive approaches, comes, and this is going both ways. So if it's very low carb or very low fat, it just tends to be more difficult to sustain. And
for sure.
What we found, I think, over the years is that basically somewhere in the middle is about right. So for people living with type 2 diabetes, and like you said, and with pre-diabetes, we have a varying guide on how many carbohydrates we generally recommend. But then with each individual, it can shift. And as they improve their health over the long term and they start sleeping better, they work on their mental health and they lower their stress levels, they might find their carbohydrate tolerance, if you like, increases, and they can be more flexible. But for sure. So to the question, Roxana, you don't need to be in ketosis to keep your blood sugar levels low. I think there's a difference between sort of chronically elevated blood sugar levels and those transient rises and dips from meals. So if you're a healthy individual, there's nothing wrong with your glucose levels rising as long as they come back down. The issue with type 2 diabetes is they're obviously chronically elevated.
And they don't come back down.
They don't come back down. And that's obviously due to the reasons we talked about before. So yeah, so nutritional ketosis can work, but probably unsustainable for most people. But if you're someone who wants to try a keto diet, then, you know, give it a go. But generally, for the long term, having a balance of loads of all the different macronutrients tends to be, well, for us, I think the most effective. It's quite hard for people to say, I'm going to eat less than 50 grams of carbs for the rest of my life. You know,
you've got to have a flexible approach, and that's something that always pops up when I'm coaching. Is people go, I can't eat out with my friends anymore. I can't go to restaurants. I can't do this, and it's like, it's not the type of approach that we want you to give up anything that you enjoy.
Absolutely.
It's rather just finding a balance, because something that I notice with a lot of NHS members is that, number one, they don't really know how to build a balanced meal. They don't know what a balanced meal looks like. Normally they are piling on the carbs, you know, like a whole big bowl of rice or things like that. So just monitoring it and limiting it a little bit without restricting yourself can have such a big impact in the long run.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things we try and do as well is, because people are often concerned, say, if you look at, say, traditional South Asian diets, for example, and East Asian diets, are typically very high in carbohydrates, so white rice, white bread, noodles, etc. And people are concerned, well, you know, you might recommend a lower carb diet. Now, we want to say we don't recommend low carb. It's more lower carb than what people might typically be consuming. And they think, oh, I can't eat my traditional foods, and it's more of it's just a shift, it's just a rebalance. So, you know, with our we've got plenty of pasta and rice and noodle dishes on Second Nature. It's just that we might extract some of the carbohydrates from the noodles, and we might replace that with a bit more protein, some more veggies to pack in the fiber, the micronutrients, and we might replace it with a bit more healthy fat as well from olive oil or something like that as well. So yeah, like you said, it's just a bit of a shift in perspective about what is a balanced diet and how does it look. And I think whilst we would all agree, like, carbs aren't the devil, I think it's just generally in today's, particularly in Western cultures, most people are over consuming carbohydrate. They're consuming way north of 400 or 500 grams of carbohydrates a day. And honestly, unless you're an elite athlete, you don't really need that many. Like, you know, your body is probably lacking a bit of protein and fiber as well. So we've got a question in the chat, actually, from Shan. And she says, what is the cause of insulin resistance? Now, we've probably covered a few of those, but she's probably we could probably touch on the main lifestyle factors. So what would you say to that, Gemma, from a lifestyle perspective? Because we don't want to just identify one thing.
I think from a lifestyle, do you know what? It's such a difficult question to answer on its own, because there's so many factors that implement it. And while diet and exercise, you know, they're two key factors that can play a role, things like our stress levels can also have an impact. Do you think our cortisol, like our adrenaline, you know, if they're all kind of out of whack, it's almost like one of those things, like if one of them goes up, the other one goes down. If they're out of balance over time, it can cause insulin resistance. There's not just one thing that is going to cause insulin resistance. Like if you eat too many carbs for too long, that by itself is probably not going to cause insulin resistance. But if you then tie that in to go, I'm really stressed all the time, I'm sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, like all of these kind of things, you're not exercising, you know, you've got no like aerobic exercises, you're not walking, swimming, cycling, doing any sort of like strength activities, like anaerobic exercises, all of those are going to tie in to becoming insulin resistant over time.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on sleep there. And I remember there's quite a famous study where they took 14 healthy people and they restricted their sleep to 4 hours a night. And by the end of the 2 weeks, they were diagnosed as pre-diabetic. Wow. Because they developed such high levels of insulin resistance that their fasting blood glucose levels were so high that they were within the pre-diabetes threshold, which is super interesting. And it's a tough one to say this is the cause of insulin resistance. Like you said, there's going to be a combination of, I think generally the main causes for people are never just one thing, because like you said, it's all tied in together. So typically we'll see people eat a diet really rich in ultra processed foods, which are high in refined starches, sugar, vegetable oils, low in fiber, low in protein, and with excess energy as well. And then in line with that, people also typically are quite stressed, like you said, the relationship with cortisol, the lack of sleep, and they're often sedentary, so they're not really exercising. Mental health problems can be a big thing as well. So if you're living with a mental health condition, that we can't dissociate the brain from the body. When you are struggling with psychological health, it does impact the functionality of your body as well.
And
so,
we know the impact as well that sugar has on the gut-brain axis and the gut-brain connection.
Absolutely.
That actually excess sugar that can have an impact on mental well-being and mental health conditions in itself. So
absolutely,
it's a cycle.
It's something like I can't remember if you remember the mechanism. It's something like excess sugar leads to
like leaky gut.
A leaky gut, but it's like it leads to like an overgrowth of the bacteria that we don't want in the gut.
Basically, essentially, it reduces the good bacteria and increases the bad bacteria. And then once there's kind of that leaky gut going on, it's easier for the bad bacteria to get in. But as you'll know, and hopefully people here will like listen and learn from this, is that the more that you eat sugary foods or ultra processed foods or refined carbohydrates, the more your body craves them. Yeah. So then you end up at this like catch-22 where you're like, well, actually, I don't want to do this anymore. But then your body's going, eat me. Like it's difficult.
Yeah, it's like, did you watch that? Was it Dr. Chris Tullochon on BBC?
I didn't.
So he and this is only an N=1, so it's only one person study, but we know we've got there is clinical trials showing exactly what you just said. The more you eat ultra processed foods, the more you want them, and there's a reason for that. It's called the bliss point. They're literally made to make you eat more. So he went on an 80% ultra processed food diet for 4 weeks, I think. And at the end of the 4 weeks, he'd obviously put on weight, like no surprise there. But yeah, his blood sugars got worse, his insulin resistance got worse. But the interesting thing was they did a brain scan before and after, and his neural pathways completely switched. So his brain and obviously I'm not a neuroscientist, and I even think they were cautious in the documentary to say, we don't really know what this switch means, but there's something happening here that we need to investigate. And you would imagine with that, the drivers to overconsume from these ultra processed foods, there's something going on in the brain with our reward circuitry that is just making us eat more of those foods. And I mean, we hate to like identify one food as being causal, because ultra processed foods are a combination of many. But I think a lot of people do struggle with that level of sugar in food, where they sugar and the sweet taste seems to be what people are after. So it always seems to be the sweeter versions of these foods that really sort of drive over consumption as well. I mean, I know. I know for me, like an almond croissant is like
the best.
It's just
the best. It's probably got about 85 grams of sugar in it, but
and you could eat that all day long, and obviously every now and again it's brilliant, but as a daily routine, it's probably not the best. Okay, so we've got a few more questions that you shared with us this week, Gemma, that have come through from members on the Second Nature program, which is brilliant. No more questions in the chat just yet, but there's a few of them that we've answered. So the healthy weight question around type 2 diabetes, we talked about that. One of the questions was, what is the difference between fasting blood sugar and HbA1c? Which is a good question. And I think the main difference is basically fasting blood sugar. So glucose can either run freely, not run, but it can either circulate freely in the blood, or it can bind to our hemoglobin. So that is what HbA1c is. Our hemoglobin, our red blood cells, glucose can bind to them. And because the red blood cells survive for about 8 weeks, it gives us an idea of our average glucose levels, whereas our fasting levels will be how much free glucose, you could say, is in the blood after a 12-hour overnight fast. And both markers are actually, a good way to indicate how well you're managing your blood sugar levels. But they kind of tell you different things, because let's say I had a dinner of 10 almond croissants and I was really stressed and I only had 4 hours sleep, my fasting blood sugar levels would be really high.
High, yeah.
But that doesn't mean I've got type 2 diabetes. It just means it can just reflect what you did the previous day. So we tend not to use fasting glucose as a diagnostic tool because of that reason, effectively. And so here's a good question, Gemma. So I think we've already kind of talked about this. This person's asking, like, do I need to avoid carbohydrates to help me reduce my blood sugar levels? We've kind of touched on that, but what would you say? I think we've talked about the kind of the fact how we like to include different, all the different macronutrients, and how, yes, a lower carb approach can be beneficial in terms of the physiology and helping the body recover from type 2 diabetes. But what would you say to the psychology of trying to restrict entire food groups? How might that impact the sustainability of a diet, do you think?
Well, this is a multifaceted answer. Well, first of all, we know that if we restrict ourselves of something for too long, especially carbs, as they're our brain's primary source of energy, of fuel,
absolutely,
we're going to end up, needing them and almost like having that thing where we're craving them. We're going, oh my God, I need this. So actually restricting yourself from something is never a good idea. It could be carbs, it could be anything. And I would always go with the approach of like a little bit of everything is good for you, but it's about what you're having. So like, for example, I would never say to someone, give up carbs, but I would say, what type of carbs are you consuming? Because you've got your refined carbs, your simple carbs, and then you've got your complex carbs. And your refined carbs, like white bread, white pasta, white rice, they're going to send a quick spike in your blood sugar levels when you eat them. They've got a high glycemic index compared to the counterpart, which is brown rice, brown bread, brown pasta, like oats and things like that. They are going to contain fiber. They are going to contain other nutrients that not only are you going to eat them and you're going to get other nutrients, but it's going to slow down the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. So that would be one of the things that I would always recommend, is that I know people tend to love the white carbs. White carbs are great. It's absolutely fine. And having them in isolation from time to time is absolutely fine, because what you do more of is going to affect you more than what you do less of, right? So if you can change the way that you view things without restricting yourself, that's going to have a huge impact.
Absolutely. And I think often as well, it's like, what are you consuming the carbohydrates with, right? So often, well, like we were talking about earlier, one of the issues is that your meal, some people's meals might contain 80% carbohydrates from refined sources, whereas with our approach, it's more, let's try and flip that around a bit. Maybe 30% of your plate around. We like to use the fistful, right? So it's about one fistful of carbs and like a palm size of protein, so a nice piece of salmon, and then like half a plate of veg, right? And then we like to say as well, like a thumb size addition of fat, so whether that's extra virgin olive oil or even the fat that's already included in the salmon. And it's just rebalancing. You're still consuming the carbohydrates you love, but you're just balancing it out with other essential nutrients, because often it might not be only that you're eating too many carbs, but then because you're eating, say, so many carbohydrates, you're not eating fiber, protein, healthy fats that your body's going to benefit from. So I think you're absolutely right. And to the point around like craving when you restrict food, I read this last week, and I've not heard this term before, but it's a theory in psychology called the white bear effect. It's like, if I said to you, Gemma, don't think about a white bear,
you're going to think of a white bear.
You're going to think of a white bear. And it's the same when we talk about food and restriction. So if I said to you, Gemma, don't eat sugar, sugar is bad, avoid sugar completely, it's the white bear.
Everything that I'm going to be looking for in the cupboards, sugar's going to be the first thing on my mind.
Exactly. So there's a difference between how we approach restriction. So it's not to say lowering your sugar intake isn't a good thing. It's to say you do that by choice for a positive reason, because you value your health, you want to manage your blood sugar levels, maybe you want to lose some weight and feel better, and like you said, not have that negative impact that these ultra processed foods and sugar can have on the gut. I actually saw a paper that was released this week And it was just it was more of a commentary than a clinical trial, but they were talking about the potential mechanisms of ultra processed foods on gut inflammation and excuse me, and the negative impact they might have on the gut and leaky gut, and obviously the connection that you talked about with the gut and the brain, and how that could impact our mood and mental health. So yeah, it's all interconnected. So yeah, we definitely not recommend anyone completely cutting out anything. But yeah, it's like with a sustainable approach, it's choosing your restriction rather than it being forced upon you. And because if you say I'm never eating carbs again, probably
it's not going to last.
Yeah.
And it's also,
I mean,
do you know what, it's adapting the way that you enjoy food as well. Like if going back to like psychological ways, like how can we learn to enjoy the food that we're eating more, because we live in a very fast-paced environment, right? People are eating on the go, people are eating while they're on their phones, they're watching TV, they're not really paying attention to what they're eating. So one of the approaches that I love to use is mindful eating, right? So like focusing on your senses, you know, put all the distractions away, because I know I'm guilty of it at times when I'm eating, but sometimes I'm like, I've finished eating and then I've not enjoyed that, and it can make you want to eat more. So it's like, using your senses. What does your food smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like on your fork, in your hand, in your mouth? But also slowing down and taking time to eat. Absolutely. Because so many people eat so quickly, and that can lead to overeating, because it takes around 20 minutes for your brain to signal to your tummy that you're full. So if you're eating in 10 minutes, you're then going to go, oh, might have those seconds. And then you're going to feel sick. And if you are over ingesting refined carbs or just overeating in general, it's going to make you feel sluggish. And if you are having that quick rise and fall in blood sugars, you might feel energetic for like half an hour, but you're going to feel worse at the end of it. Absolutely.
And I think the point you, I've kind of lost my train of thought. Could you summarize what you just said again, Gemma?
I basically said to focus on mindful eating, taking a step back, enjoying what you're eating.
That's it. Oh, it was that was it. It was the reward element. Sorry, I'm back in the room. That is so true, because if, like, obviously food is so rewarding, and if you're watching TV and you haven't got that reward from it, it makes sense you would think I need more, or I need a dessert or something like that. So I think that's a really good point, and paying attention to the food, I couldn't agree more. Really good.
Just on that note, I did have another query, because I was speaking to one of my groups about this today.
Brilliant.
Obviously, diet, we know, plays a huge role in managing blood glucose levels. Evening snacking. If this ties in really nicely to what we were just saying, because if you're not paying attention to what you're eating, and then you're having dinner, and then you go, I want something sweet, and then you're having something sweet before you go to bed, which is then going to have an impact on your sleep, potentially, depending on how close you're having it to bed. So absolutely, it could for sure. And over time, you can imagine, if you just get into that routine of snacking in the evening, and your brain starts to associate, so you mindlessly eat in front of the TV, you then think, I need something sweet. You're sat in front of the television, you're watching TV, it's 9 o'clock, you have a treat, and your brain starts to associate the environment and that behavior with that snack. And it goes so 9 p.m. biscuit time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's the behavioral aspects are really interesting. And I think this there's a good a strategy I like to call design power. So people often talk about, you know, how do I reduce my cravings, and how do I avoid or how do I limit the foods that I'm trying to limit and eat more mindfully, etc. And there's no perfect answer, some of the things we talked about, but I think designing your environment to be conducive to healthy habits is a good way to start. So we had this discussion in our webinar last week about building a healthy relationship with food, and someone said that they intentionally don't buy, say, crisps or snacks or sugar because they know if it is in the house, they'll probably like give in and eat the lot, so to speak. And it was a question of, is that showing a poor relationship with food because they're choosing not to bring it into the house? And we weren't really sure, to be honest, but I think generally the consensus between me and Natasha, at least, was that I do that as well. And I don't see a problem with designing your environment to be healthy.
Agreed.
And if
I
you
agree.
then choose to consume something outside of that, say it's Friday night and you want to have a takeaway and you make a cheesecake, you know, but then you're being intentional. There's a reason for it. Maybe it's with your partner, your family. It's Friday night, like, God, yeah, let's watch a film and have a cheesecake. Wonderful. It's like there's an intention and a reason behind it rather than just the habitual, I'm consuming it because it's there. So I think
if anything, that is having a positive impact on your relationship with food, because I do exactly the same. I don't, unless I really fancy something, I won't buy it, because I know if I keep it in the house, it's almost like out of sight, out of mind for me. Because if I open the fridge and I see it, or I open the cupboard, I go, oh, I'll just have a little bit of that. So many of us are guilty of that. And so many people that I coach say the same when they've got children. You know, they have snacks for their children. They don't buy them for themselves, but they end up eating them because they're there for the kids. So it's almost like you need to retrain the way that you think and train your environment as much as you can within your control to benefit you, because it's the tiny changes that have the biggest impact.
Absolutely, and they all amalgamate. We've got a good question in the chat on YouTube, and I think it's actually someone who's on the Second Nature program, I think, and they're saying, I'm type 2 diabetic, I'm on the 12-week program. I'm assuming they mean Second Nature. And she says, or he, not sure, I think she, the cat lady 63, so yeah, it must be a she, program for myself. The amount of carbs in the daily guidelines seem too high for me to control my blood sugars. So I think this comes down to what we were saying earlier with individualization, right? So some people might find their carbohydrate tolerance at their level, in their condition, their current level, is maybe a bit too high, and they need to lower their overall carbohydrate content, or maybe there's an element of being wiser with what you're pairing it with, the amount of protein, the amount of fiber. And I guess also, it could be that for the short term, whilst their type 2 diabetes recovers, they might have to have slightly lower carbohydrate intake than other people, while their pancreas recovers, their liver fat reduces, and then over time their insulin sensitivity would improve. And I think that it ties in well to the concept of individualization, right? Because you talked about
100%.
you talked about our guidelines earlier, and I think it's important because we often get questions on it, and I think it's important to highlight they're like a foundation.
They're a baseline, and it doesn't mean it's like any recommendation. Like the nutrition recommendations in general in like the world are constantly changing, and we're constantly adapting to them. But that's the thing to remind, that's the key word, it's recommendation. It doesn't mean it's what you have to do. So that's why, as health coaches on the program, we're here to support you as an individual. And I'm actually working directly with a lady at the moment who kind of said something similar to what this lady said, in terms of like, she's a sedentary lady and she can't do much exercise. And she said she doesn't want to eat that many carbohydrates. So we looked at reducing them, not so much into like ketosis, but reducing them to less than what our guidelines were, because that is what worked for her. And now we're looking at introducing them again. So it's an individual approach. It's what works for one won't work for another.
And I think what you pointed on is really important. It's like what will work for that person at that time might change. So for that interim, it sounded like she just needed a bit of a break while she just created her foundations, improved her blood sugar levels, felt better, and then there might be more flexibility down the line. So I think that's a really good point. So we've got the one final question we had on diet and type 2 diabetes, and I think we've already covered it, but the question was, what's the best diet for type 2 diabetes, which I think is an interesting one.
What's the best diet for type 2 diabetes? We have answered this, but like to be more coherent, it is having balanced meals with a source of protein, fat, carbs, and veggies. You're getting all your nutrients. Not only are you going to be benefiting your body, but you're going to be benefiting your mind too, because these are good for mental and physical well-being. So, you know, I feel like from all the research that's out there, there's so much research to support a lower carb diet on, you know, benefiting diabetes. Doesn't mean that you have to do that for the rest of your life, but while you're trying to manage and while you're trying to, you know, reverse type 2 diabetes or manage pre-diabetes, it can be a good route to go down.
Absolutely. And there was a meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal, aka the BMJ, which showed that lower carb approaches were more effective. I think it was you were 35% more likely to achieve diabetes remission with lower carb than the traditional low fat. And actually, there was a really interesting study, and I wish I could share the graph, but we could maybe put a link in the description after today. And it was a network meta-analysis where they compared, and a network meta-analysis is, step back, sorry, what is a meta-analysis? A meta-analysis, for everyone, is basically a study that reviews lots of different studies that have been done on the same topic, because then we're getting an idea of what the overarching, the majority of evidence is suggesting. And a network meta-analysis is where they're able to compare different variables to one outcome. So in these outcomes, they were looking at blood sugar. So what are the best dietary approaches for blood sugar levels and management of HbA1c and all the things we talked about today? And they looked at, I think it was 7 dietary patterns. So there was low fat, vegetarian, I think low GI, high fiber, high protein, the paleo diet, Mediterranean, and low carb, or we'll call it lower carb. And the top 3 diets were all relatively lower to moderate dietary carbohydrate intake. So low carb was proven to be the most effective at lowering HbA1c, the average blood glucose levels. And then the Mediterranean diet was next. So the Mediterranean diet, people often mistake it for a low-fat diet. It's actually not.
No,
so the Western interpretation of it is that it's a low-fat diet. If you go to the Mediterranean and you do there is any studies on the Mediterranean diet, it's very like moderate fat, moderate carb. So it's much lower carbohydrate than the typical Western diet of about 60% carbohydrates. It's more like 40%. It's like kind of even with fat. And then the paleo diet, which is basically another form of lower carb without dairy and fruit and things like that. So so the research is suggesting, yes, for people living with type 2 diabetes, as you said, at least in the kind of interim, lower carb approaches, particularly based on whole foods, is going to be very effective. And I think we should probably step back from that and say as well, what I would say is that I'm very much a believer in the fact that the majority of health benefits that people get when they change their diet is not so much about the macro balance, although I do think that has a part to play for sure. It's more the fact they're going from 80% ultra processed foods to 80% whole foods. It's going back to our roots. It's cooking from fresh ingredients. It's eating your whole foods, your veggies, your nuts, your seeds, your lentils, meat, dairy, fish, these whole foods that are extremely nutrient dense, satisfying, nourishing for the body. And I think that's where the biggest health improvements come. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of emphasize that as well.
Sure. And I would just say a little caveat to that.
Oh, go on.
For anyone who is watching, listening, low fat, just be mindful that low fat products are usually packed with added sugars. So always check the ingredients label for added sugars and try and opt for foods that have got less than 5 grams of sugar per 100 grams. Because this is a conversation that I have with people all the time, is that they go, okay, well, do you know what? I'm doing low carb and I'm doing low fat. And I'll go, oh, are you... It kind of defeats the point, because I'm like, you're going low fat, but actually there's so much sugar in these products. Absolutely. And it's even things like low fat mayo, and it's conversations that I have all the time. So yeah, be mindful with low fat foods.
Absolutely.
And the sugar content.
Absolutely. And I think that's like one of the key messages really with people. The low fat label has been associated with health and weight loss and all this stuff, but I mean, fortunately, science has moved on. We've got an article online where we highlight the we kind of highlight the downfalls of the low fat dietary approach, basically. And there was a really interesting study by Kevin Hall and the National Institute of Health in the US recently, where they basically they had 2 groups, and it's a weight loss diet. So they reduced their calories by 30%. So they have to be you have to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. So both groups were eating the same amount of calories, but what they did was one group was had lower carbs, and the other group had lower fat. So then you're not just restricting calories, you're choosing which macronutrient you're restricting. So you had lower carb or lower fat. And then this is really interesting. They did brain imaging to look at the dopamine reward signaling in the brain. And in the lower carb group, their reward from the calorie restricted lower carb group, their reward signaling didn't change, indicating that they were getting the same amount of reward from their meals, even though they're restricting calories, versus the low fat intervention, where it did change. And what they did after that is they said to people, okay, so you've been on this weight loss diet, low fat, low carb. They then got access to like a canteen where they were told you can eat whatever you want, essentially. And what they showed was that the people in the low fat group were more inclined to overindulge in the ultra processed foods we were talking about earlier, so like donuts, pastries, chips, crisps, that kind of thing. And then, so that's interesting, because what that might be saying, and this is still this is the only study to show this, by the way, so we can't get too overconfident with it. But if it's repeated again in different labs, like it might be that when you're restricting fat, trying to lose weight, you're not getting enough reward from the food you're eating, and therefore you will seek it out elsewhere. Whereas when you're having lower carbs, but you're still consuming enough fat, protein, and fiber, you might actually still get the same, you might get enough reward from those foods to help you eat less overall and lose weight in the long term. Bit of a divergence, but I thought that
it's all interesting stuff.
Really
though.
interesting
it's all
study.
learning. Every day is a learning day.
Absolutely. Right, Jemma. So we're down to the last 7 minutes or so.
That's gone quickly.
It has gone quick. So yeah, we've got about 8 minutes left. Is there anything else in your experience? You've been working at Second Nature now for what, 3 years?
Yeah, 3 years in Jan.
So I think I always like to 3 years in January. Bloody hell! Well,
I know.
That's gone quickly. And I always like to finish these things with like a bit of hope, a bit of a hopeful message, and that's like kind of the ethos of Second Nature, right? Like we don't want to scaremonger. We don't want to, put fear in people and say, you don't want to eat this because it will do X and Y and blah, blah, blah. It's more, if you choose to eat in this way, think about how much mobility you'll have for the future, etc., etc. So if there was a message of hope you'd like to send people about who might be living with type 2 diabetes, what would it be? What would be your motivation for them?
It can get better. It can get better.
Mm-hmm.
And to go into more detail with that is it can get better because you are in control of your own life to a certain extent. And that always goes back to the 1% change. I will forever believe in. So James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits, one of my favorite authors, and his content is incredible. And he talks about, making a 1% change, because when we think about going through a lifestyle change, people get very apprehensive, people get very scared, they get anxious. It's completely understandable, because if you're going through a huge upheaval in your life, it's understandable to feel like that. But to make a 1% change could be as simple as taking an extra sip of water each day, making sure that you get an extra vegetable with your dinner, something like that. So have hope and try and make the changes that are realistic for you.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think that's a good point. People think you need to change everything overnight. That's the only way. And don't get me wrong, some people do that, and it can work. You can go from one extreme to the next. Absolutely. But I'd say they're the outliers. Generally, these changes happen gradually, right? So if you're cooking no meals from fresh ingredients at the moment, and you go from cooking 2 a week, that is an improvement. And your health will benefit. Your health will improve a little bit. So I think that's a really good point.
And consistency. It's consistency, because
definitely.
We can all make changes, but if we're not consistent with them, we're not going to reap the benefits. So it is making those really tiny changes, but also just adapting them into our routine so that they become part of our everyday.
Absolutely. And I think, you have to align it to your values too, right? So you have to, like we talked about earlier, it's like choice. You have to want to do it. So a lot of people struggle with motivation or willpower, right? So Whereas it's less about willpower, and it's more about, well, what do you want to do, and why are you doing it? So if you truly value your health, your well-being, if you value your independence when you're older, if you want to avoid living a life glued to medications and things like that, these things are intrinsically valuable and they're worth sticking to, so that's something we definitely focus on as well. So we have actually had another question in the chat, which I think is quite a good one actually, and we'll just do this to finish because we've only got 5 minutes left, and I think we'll have some closing comments. But someone's just asking how to go with lower carbs if you would like to reduce your consumption of meat or ultra processed food for your protein intake. Quite often vegan options are ultra processed or from beans. So great. I think it's a great point. I think vegan diets are typically, the protein sources in vegan diets are typically
usually complex carb sources as well.
Exactly. However, what we'd say when we're talking about quality carbohydrates earlier, the vegan sources of carbohydrates such as beans and pulses and legumes, they're also going to be packed with fiber as well. So their energy density from carbohydrates a bit lower. There's more fiber, there's a bit of protein. So there is that to consider. But I think we've got a few. All I would say is for that question is we do have a guide on the Second Nature website talking about vegan protein sources and how to get all the essential nutrients on the vegan diet. So I'd recommend going to there. But just off the top of my head, a few examples of more protein. You've got tempeh, which is a brilliant source of proteins made from soybeans and fermented.
Tofu is number one.
I've got some tofu. It's brilliant and it's cheap. It's unreal. So I got some. I now get tofu every week now because I think it's such a good, simple thing to have in the fridge. You can whip up really quickly. And it was about £2.50 for 300 grams. And people might be thinking that sounds like a lot, but if you compare it to other protein sources, so a 300 grams of steak would be over £12, I think, roughly. Off the top of my head. So if we're talking about sources of protein, tofu is incredibly cheap, affordable, easy to use, and we've got some tofu recipes on the website. And I think there's another one called seitan, which is made out of can't remember what that's made out of. I think it's a yeast extract. Can't remember.
I'm trying to remember the actual ingredients. I know it's recommended to have a little less because it's a little bit more processed compared to tofu.
Yeah, for sure. So so there is other options, and check out the Second Nature website. We've got some.
And do you know what? Things like corn, the corn products are really good as well.
I
always like because I use a lot of them as well because I've kind of gone into more of a veggie diet and trying to reduce my meat intake. And I would say there are so many good varieties out there. If you like, a veggie sausage, I will recommend the Aldi have got onion and rosemary. So good.
Good. So I think that was one of the points they made, is that typically that the meat substitutes can be ultra processed, but it really depends, right? Because
you've just got to look at the ingredients list. Because if you have a look at the ingredients list, the problem is having processed food. Processed food is not inherently bad. It's what it's processed with, because you could have something that's processed that's got 4 or 5 different ingredients. That's fine, but they're all kind of whole products in themselves. So
absolutely,
definitely check the ingredients list on
absolutely. And the general rule of thumb we say is if it's got more than 5 ingredients, be wary. But also if it just has a long list of ingredients of things you don't recognize and they sound really like chemicals, that's a bit of a warning sign, right? But I've seen some vegan sausages which was literally soy, mushrooms, and I think 2 other binding agents or something, but they're really not that bad. And I think in the context of a meal, let's say there's loads of veggies, there's legumes and beans, or maybe there's a rich sauce and maybe a sweet potato or something, and then you use some corn sausages or something like that. In the context of the meal, that's still a very small element of the meal, and I'd still say it's a healthy meal all round, even if they are more processed than Whole Foods or whatever. But it's like you said earlier, it's about the whole, not just the isolated ingredients, right? Okay, Gemma, so we've got 1 minute left. I think I really loved your message earlier of hope, talking about the small changes. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot now, Robbie. I honestly cannot think of anything off the top of my head.
That's
Have
fine.
you got anything to add before we finish?
That's fine. I think we've covered a lot, and yeah, I hope everyone's enjoyed it. We've kind of gone on the journey from understanding the pathology of type 2 diabetes. Hopefully we covered it in enough detail. It's really complex, and if you follow us on socials, keep an eye out for our webinar that we're doing in partnership with Vitality, the health insurers. We're going in deep on type 2 diabetes there, so keep a lookout. And yeah, and I think the key messages are restriction is typically like that kind of psychological restriction of identifying foods as bad and you can never eat them is generally not a good idea. We want to provide a bit of balance. Lower carb diets are very effective for type 2 diabetes, but it doesn't mean you have to eat no carbs forever. And it doesn't mean that's the only way to achieve good health. And I think the key things for me at the end there were just like the small changes, right? So people shouldn't think that they need to change their whole life wholesale overnight. No. If you go from not cooking at all to cooking a few times a week, that's still an improvement. Sure. So yeah, and I think I'll just summarize with it. If people don't really know who Second Nature are, I'd recommend that you visit our website, subscribe to our channel. We're releasing new videos on YouTube every week. Follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. We're a healthy lifestyle program. We offer support for people looking to lose weight and develop a healthy relationship with food. We've been working in the NHS since 2016 with people living with type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes. And actually, there was a study released in the BMJ which showed our program was twice as effective as the other 4 providers in the National Diabetes Prevention Program, which was brilliant. Caused a bit of a stir on LinkedIn, but that's what we like.
I remember.
Exactly. But anyway, thank you all for joining. If you do have any more, if you want to find more about Second Nature, please visit our website, subscribe to our channel, and yeah, you'll get all the information you need. And I think we will close it there. Now, all I'd say is, Gemma,
yes.
Do you know how we close this? Because I think Camilla needed to do this for us. Camilla is our content genius. There? I'm not sure if I'm meant to press stop or.
I would not press anything for now. People can just, if they're still on a live stream and they're listening to us, they can just listen to us babble.
Yeah, exactly.
This is part of what we do day to day.